Right.
Hello, we are live. Okay, welcome to the very first episode of Battle Tested History.
Yes.
Yes, with me is Mr. Scott Baker. And before we get started, I should probably explain why this is premiering on a group dedicated to horror. Well, there's two reasons, both of which are very simple. One, I run the group, so I get to exercise my megalomania. And the second is Scott has written, what, five novels now that deal with historical events.
Um, I've got
Well,
quite a few that deal, that have historical in them.
yeah, you've got the three Tatiana novels. You've
Yeah,
got Operation Majestic,
right.
and who can forget Nazi ghouls from space? There's history there, and your face is frozen.
But
Excellent.
Twilight of the Twilight of the Living Dead, which is the Berlin in 1945 falls to the Dead Army, not the Red Army.
Excellent.
And in the Vampire Hunters series, I do a lot of flashback scenes explaining the vampires' history throughout the ages.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I love it. My old man used to watch war movies, and I'd watch them with him.
Oh, yeah.
And I grew up loving history. I majored in it. I got my master's in it. Whenever I travel overseas, most people want to go see the Louvre. I want to go see Normandy. So
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm the same exact way.
Yeah.
So you actually have bona fides. You were a history teacher.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm a rank amateur, but
Well, I was only a history teacher for 6 months, but
technicality counts, buddy.
yeah.
So anyway, today we are beginning with two movies, and the idea of this entire thing is to take Hollywood's version of historical events. Yes, and you laugh, justifiably so.
Yeah.
And matching them up with the actual history. So today we're doing, in honor of the Independence Day weekend coming up, we're doing two events. One of them is the Declaration of Independence, 1776.
Right.
The other is the Battle of Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
So we watch. Well, we're going to start with 1776. So Scott, take it away, buddy.
All right. Thank you. The TV, the miniseries I watched was the one on about George Washington on Amazon Prime. It's 3 1.5 hour shows, covers from his life to his death, but it naturally concentrates on the American Revolution and him becoming the first president of the United States. Now, the one thing I hated being a history buff is when you went to high school, it was all this watered down propaganda.
Crap.
First in war, first in peace, first in the heart of his countrymen. No. Yeah. I mean, George Washington, don't get me wrong, is a fascinating figure. But the real historical George Washington is so much more fascinating than that tripe that, high schools vomit forth on you.
No, all of those guys are. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Henry, all of them.
Yeah. And if you ever get a chance, the HBO series about John Adams, phenomenal series.
Yeah.
I loved it.
There's also a really good book called 1776. I forget who wrote
McCullough.
McCullough, yeah. He won the Pulitzer Prize for it.
Yeah.
Justifiably so.
I've got that, I mean, he also wrote, didn't he write the book about Harry Truman?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's a fantastic historian. I mean, growing up in high school and college, I hated Truman. And then the older I got, I started to realize, damn it, Truman was a really good president.
He was probably the last true statesman we had.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't think of anybody after him that would claim the title.
And what the funny thing was, bring this back around,
Mhm.
Truman was so much like Washington as president, he didn't want the job.
Yeah.
Truman.
Well, I mean, he did, but he didn't. He did, but he didn't want the job of general, of leading
Oh, yeah.
the army.
Yeah, he loved being, he wanted to be a general, but like Truman was, they asked him in 1944, they didn't want to run the current vice president, so they asked Truman. He was popular. He was from the South, the Midwest. He's like, okay, I'll do it. What's going to happen? And then, 8 months later, he became president of the United States. Washington became president because the country was falling apart, and he was a war hero. So let me jump back quickly, just spend a little time on, which again, I found that Washington documentary, the documentary on Washington, fascinating.
Yeah.
Because, growing up in high school, it was just sort of like, yep, George Washington, raised this army, took on the British, wiped them out across, it was a stunning victory. And
which is actually crap.
Yeah, it is. It was pure dumb luck and determination on his part. He had a couple of victories. He had the one on in
Trenton, New Jersey, when he crossed the Potomac or the Delaware, and you're frozen. Well, I'll fill in for him while we wait. Yeah, he had a couple of victories. He crossed into Delaware at the end of 1776.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, I mean his attack on Trenton was brilliant. Even
that was it. I mean, it almost went completely off the rails because it was a three-pronged attack, and only one of the prongs showed up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was just, I mean, he was a smart enough man. He wanted to be a general, and he learned from his horrendous mistakes as a young officer. And
he made some doozies.
He made some, in the French Indian War, fought Duquesne's, I think it was. But it was, hello, Facebook user.
It's Zuckerberg, I know it.
No, it isn't. He would have banned us by now. We're talking pro-American history. And then when he became the general of the Continental Army, he hired the smartest people.
Yeah.
Knox was, I believe, a bookseller. But he was great at organizing and putting things together. So he became general of the artillery. It was just, plus it was his determination. The fact that he was willing to execute troops for desertion, and set the example. He would be at the front lines. They talked about at one point after the war, when Congress hadn't paid the troops and the troops were getting ready to launch a revolution of their own. And Washington shows up and he's like, I understand completely. Let me read you, what I just got from Washington. And then when he stands on the podium, he pretends that he can't read it and he puts his glasses on and starts reading it. He made that connection with his troops. The only other two generals there's probably more, but it was like Patton and MacArthur.
Yeah, well, I'm not
at least definitely Patton.
I'm not a big fan of MacArthur, but Patton definitely.
Yeah, I mean, the troops, hated him, but they loved him because he cared for them.
Yeah,
and his, he only really won one major significant battle, Yorktown.
Yeah, and that was mainly due to the French. What he was really good at doing was maneuver.
Yes.
He managed to keep the army together by getting them out of impossible situations
Exactly.
without fighting.
And there was one of the historians who said it, and it really rang so true to me. Hey, Jack, how you doing? It really rang true when he was saying he had to do this because if he failed himself, Adams, all of them would have just been put against the wall and shot. They would be maybe a chapter in British history, probably more like a few footnotes. Mm-hmm. And he fought the war, and he had the determination. He did what had to be done. And when the war was over, he was a national hero. Now, granted, the British made a lot of stupid mistakes. I mean, there was a lot of mistakes on their part that if they had done it right, things would have turned out differently. But the thing I admire most is when he became president. He didn't want to become president. He wanted to retire. He had fulfilled his lifelong dream. He had been a general. He had been a commanding officer in the Continental Army. He was ready to retire, go back to his plantation.
And that's what he did.
Yeah, he had I think at that point, 60,000 acres, they said. Mm-hmm. And he just wanted to grow tobacco. And the Continental Congress was falling apart at the seams because it was 13 different set of delegates who couldn't figure out what to do. Yeah. And the only one they would rally behind was Washington. So George Washington says, okay, I'll come back. I'll do the one term as president. And this is where I know he gets a lot of criticism for his slavery. I know he gets a lot of criticism, he's the first president, that's why we all like him. He set the precedent.
He did.
Almost every other person who ever won a revolution became the dictator.
Yep. He could have been king.
He could have
been king of America.
He could have been king of America. There was talk of making him king of America.
Yep.
You look at Robespierre, you look at every communist revolution, you look at Napoleon Bonaparte, Mussolini, Hitler, and he wouldn't do that. He set up certain standards. He set up a tax act, which really didn't go over too well with a lot of people.
No.
Taxation without representation, taxation with representation sucks just as much. So.
Yes, it does.
But he didn't, even though, and I was a little surprised when I was reading the horrendous attacks that those that disagreed with him were launching on him.
Oh, man. He was getting stabbed in the back, left, right, and sideways, man.
I know, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is like a contemporary thing. This has only happened in the last 20 years. No. They threw him under the bus, pulled him out, and threw him back under again.
Oh, yeah.
But he didn't curtail the freedom of the press. Nope. He set up a cabinet. He set up certain rules and regulations. And the most important thing, when his he didn't even want the second term, but he had to because he knew that the party was being divided. But at the end of his second term, he walked away.
Yeah.
Yep. He said 2 terms is enough. Nobody should serve more than 2 terms, and walked away from the party. And not the party, walked away from politics. And every president up until FDR, over almost like 150 years later, only served 2 consecutive terms.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, he set it up. I mean, FDR, you can kind of give him a pass for staying on because of the time in which he did it.
Right.
Because you had the Great Depression.
Right. Followed by World War II.
And it was clear sooner or later we would get involved in that war.
Yeah.
As much as nobody wanted it, he knew it was inevitable. So, rather than pass it off to somebody that was going to completely screw it up, he hung on.
And I also, just jumping off track here, but he is a key figure for July 4th, Thomas Jefferson.
Yep.
You know, Thomas Jefferson has got to get a lot of credit for when the new party, won. He didn't throw everything out.
No, he didn't.
Continuity of government. He kept on going.
Yep. And can you say peaceful transfer of power?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a fascinating time in history. We originally talked about doing the shows, the musical 1776.
I couldn't do it.
I know, but what I loved about it was the compromise. You know, Franklin, Adams, so many of the Northeast delegates were so adamant about getting rid of slavery, and the South would not accept it. So they had to accept that horrible compromise of keeping slavery to unite the South with the North.
Yes.
Which lasted less than 100 years, but that's a topic for later in the show.
Yes. Well, even the Constitution itself, when they finally got around to making it, the original draft of the Constitution, which was finished in 1787, they couldn't get all 13 colonies to sign off on it, which is why we ended up with the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments. And that was it was finally ratified in 1788. But it was done because you couldn't get half the damn colonies to sign off. And once again, you're frozen. At least you're in contemplative
I'm back.
expression. There you go.
I was just going to send you a text saying that my internet in this house, sometimes it sucks. So
it happens.
And it usually cuts out when I'm like got my mouth open or I'm making a dumb expression. So
yeah, at least you had a contemplative expression. You're like,
yeah. But it is a very fascinating time. Very fascinating time in history. And when you think of it, of all the revolutions that succeeded, ours not only is the only revolution that remained peaceful. It didn't devolve into another anarchy dictatorship. It's lasted 250 years.
Yeah, it has. Do you remember where you were at the bicentennial?
Yes, I was. We were with my father, took us all over to his best friend, who was a Marine veteran, World War II, a tanker at the Chosin Reservoir, which is what got me hooked on the Korean War. And after the cookout, we all sat in the living room and we watched the Boston Pops bicentennial celebration.
Yeah, we were on a family vacation, a driving vacation. So you know it was a long time ago.
Yes.
But we were in Amarillo, Texas. So we watched the fireworks from the roof of our hotel room, of our hotel building, on 1976, the bicentennial.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's fun around here because, I mean, Massachusetts makes such a huge deal out of Lexington, Concord.
Justifiably so.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the whole Freedom Trail, which is fantastic. If you go on the Freedom Trail, just a side note, rabbit holes. We love rabbit holes. Start at Bunker Hill.
Actually, it was Breeds Hill, not Bunker Hill.
Work your way back. Huh?
Yeah, actually, it was Breeds Hill. That's where the battle took place. It wasn't actually Bunkers Hill.
Breeds Hill.
Breeds Hill.
Right. But if you start in Boston, you wind up on Breeds Hill. If you make it that far, you're exhausted, and there's nothing there. It's a residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
So there's no subway, there's no cab. Take a cab, start there, work your way back, and then when you get bored as hell, you're already in the heart of Boston.
Yeah, I've been to two of probably the two biggest, most important battles of the Pacific War and World War II. Midway the
Oh,
Guadalcanal.
I want to see those so bad.
Well, the thing is, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. Midway, you've got a big ass statue of an albatross. And I think there's a little plaque.
That was in your book, wasn't it? The first
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, there's nothing there to indicate how important
Mhm.
that place was. Guadalcanal is the same way. I heard there was a plaque up on was it Bloody Ridge?
Bloody Ridge. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Of course, the snorkeling was awesome.
Mm.
I dove on this Japanese freighter that had beached,
Oh.
and the boiler had blown, and it took the ship and just boom, peeled it open. That was awesome.
Now, the only World War II Pacific battlefield I ever got to, I was stationed 3 years on Okinawa. And I found out that my uncle was with the 1st Marines. So I read a history book, and it turned out that where the Marines landed was right near the CIA facility I worked. So one day I took the day off and I took photographs of the beach. I followed it inland to the airfield. A lot of the revetments are still there, and they're now like used for hiding tractors and that. And I found out he was at the Battle of Sugarloaf Hill, where only 18 Marines walked away.
Wow.
And the hill is still standing. It's in the middle of a residential neighborhood, but nobody will build on it because they're terrified of ghosts.
Yeah. Well, my one and only potentially supernatural encounter took place on the island of Saipan.
Oh.
Because we decided to camp out on top of Suicide Cliff.
Oh, man.
And we were a bunch of drunken idiots. We had rented a car and stuffed the trunk full of beer. And we were going to camp out because it's the tropics. Yeah. It's always warm. And sun goes down, and we're being drunk and stupid. And all of a sudden, it got cold. I mean, really, really damn cold.
Yeah.
We ended up just stuffing ourselves into the car, and we spent the night that way, and woke up horribly hungover.
No. Now, if I could see Pacific World War II battlefields, Guadalcanal, Midway, Iwo Jima, and I know this is weird. I'm a huge, huge fan of the Southwest Pacific. Port Moresby, Ley, and Rabaul.
Yeah. We also went to a couple of really small islands. My personal favorite being Kapingamarangi.
Say that while you're drunk.
I'm serious. I have, and it's not pretty. But there was a wreck of a Japanese Zero on Kapingamarangi, and I think one of the other islands, I think it might have been Guam. There was a tank, a Japanese tank that wrecked that was just up against one of the big ridges.
Well, they used to on Okinawa. I could never do it because I worked every weekend, unfortunately. There used to be a group that used to go spelunking in the old caves used by the Japanese soldiers.
Wow.
And the agreement with the Japanese military, the Japanese government was you could keep anything military you found. Anything personal had to be turned over to the Japanese government to be given to their, which, it was perfect. It made sense. And it did the double service because, not only were those guys learning Japanese military history, but family members were getting closure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's perfectly appropriate.
Yeah.
The one thing I kind of think crossed the line, and this, well, I mean, you know me, I'm not really prejudiced about much of anything except assholes, but I think that's just general. Everybody hates them. But
I'm sorry, I missed that because I cut out. Everybody hates who?
assholes.
Oh yeah,
That's about the only thing the only group I discriminate against.
yeah.
But in Hawaii, the signs leading to the Arizona Memorial
Mm-hmm.
are written in both English and Japanese. And
I don't.
I'm like, I think that's a bit too far because I sincerely doubt that Nagasaki has signs
No,
written in English.
no. I visited that big Japanese Yakasuki shrine when I was in Tokyo.
Mm.
And it talked about how the Japanese were spreading peace and prosperity all over Asia until those mean
Oh,
Americans.
sure they were. Okay, now you're frozen on kind of a bizarre.
Drop bombs on them. No, you're talking. Yeah. Okay. I was at Pearl Harbor in 1992. I'm standing on the memorial for the Arizona.
I was actually
And
there in 1992.
And this Japanese guy, whose age would have been perfect for a World War II veteran, was standing with a Japanese woman, and he was pointing to the valley where the Japanese planes came through.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was much more shy, but I really wished I wanted to go over and say to him, "Were you here? And if so, I will buy you and your wife lunch if you tell me your side of the story."
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, the reason I think that I kind of back away from the idea is the Arizona Memorial. If you went there, right?
Right.
Arizona Memorial. For those who've never been there is a granite wall.
Yeah.
Inside this memorial with 1,100 names on it.
Yeah.
Those are the names of the people that are buried beneath your feet.
Yeah. Yeah, because none of them were ever taken out of the Arizona.
They tried, but it was just too explosive.
Mm.
There were pockets of gas in there. There was a lot of flammable liquid that's still in there.
Yeah. I went twice. I went in 92, and then I went in early 2000s, right after they opened up the Missouri exhibit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And that was kind of weird to see. Okay, this is where it began. This is where it ended.
Yeah, that's true. That is a good juxtaposition. Yeah, there's a thing we used to do on ships. It was called rendering honors.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody would get all prettied up in their dress uniforms, and they would man one whole side of the ship and pass in front of whoever we were rendering honors to and salute. And I usually thought it was a bunch of bullshit, except
the Arizona.
Yeah. That you can't. I mean, you can't look at that wall and not feel something.
No.
If you can, you're not human.
No, that is, and those poor kids, and they were mostly kids. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Those kids, half of the casualties of Pearl Harbor took place there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In an instant.
Yeah. I remember reading one story from Day of Infamy, Walter Lord, one of the best naval historians. And they were in the armored wheelhouse. And the armored wheelhouse has these slits that are about that big that you can look out. And he said when he was on the Arizona, when the Arizona blew up, there was him and his friend. And when the smoke cleared, he was standing there perfectly unscathed. His friend was gone, and the only way his friend could have left was by being pushed through those slits.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
holy shit.
It is very sombering, and I think this is a great gateway to the next part. It's very sombering to visit battlefields. It's one thing to watch it on TV. Let me lead the gateway into your section. I was at Gettysburg once,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody heard of Pickett's charge. It was a real bad thing. I was standing where Robert E. Lee was, looking towards the Union side, and the first thought was, "Holy shit!
What the hell was he thinking?
What was?" But these kids did it.
Oh yeah,
They loved Lee so much, and it's like this mile or more of open terrain going uphill to get to artillery, and they made it
in one spot.
in one spot, but still.
None of them ever came back from it either.
No, but
Yeah, of the one place they breached that wall
yeah,
with Dulles Armistead,
yeah,
all of them, every last one of them were either killed, injured, wounded, or captured.
yeah.
None of them made it back to their lines.
No, it's sombering to stand there and to think you as the soldier are crossing that, knowing
There's no way in hell I would have done that.
they did it.
I know they did it, but I could look at that. You're on your mind.
Yeah, of course we're older, So, but
yeah,
let's jump into Gettysburg.
Okay, Gettysburg. Now, I'm going to go way back into ancient history to introduce this, because
Yes, Jack.
we exist at the top of the food chain for one very simple reason: we're the best at killing. If you look at Australopithecus, who were the last non-fully erect hominids to exist. They were supplanted by Homo erectus. And where they found groups of Homo erectus, and I know...
I'm sorry. I tried to keep this straight.
You can't. I know.
Why I took geology. That's why I took geology and not biology.
There you go. But where they found the remains of Homo erectus, they've also found hand axes, which were these sharpened, like flint or whatever kind of stone it was. And there's no direct evidence that they used those as weapons, but wherever Homo erectus cropped up, Australopithecus either went away or they died.
Yeah.
So you got to think, all right, there had to be some killing going on. And then, fast forward, Neanderthal did the same thing to Homo erectus, because they were better at killing. Cro-Magnon did the same thing to Neanderthal. And then we did the same thing to Cro-Magnon. We are at the top of the food chain because we're really damn good at killing.
Yeah.
And if you look at Gettysburg, the 10 years of Vietnam, there were 58,000 killed.
Yeah.
There were 50,000 casualties in 3 days.
Yeah.
At Gettysburg. 50,000. That we had become so good at killing that it was just astonishing.
I know.
So anyway, the movie was the TBS movie version of Michael Shiraz's book, The Killer Angels.
Yes.
Which was technically a novel, because what he did with it is he took the events and then he took the writings of the people involved in those events and he kind of put words into their mouths. Right. But they were the words that they had said or something very like them in the stuff they wrote. So it was pretty close.
Yeah.
There's some fudging going on, but for the most part, what happened was the South. There's a lot that said that the South was winning all the battles, so Lee decided to invade the North. Well, it wasn't that simple
Mhm.
because the South wasn't winning all the battles. They had this thorn in their side called Ulysses S. Grant,
Yes.
out in Mississippi, laying siege to what the hell is the name of that
Vicksburg.
town? Vicksburg.
Yeah.
Vicksburg, and the people in Vicksburg were screaming for the Confederacy to send troops.
Mhm.
So Jefferson Davis wanted Lee to break off a bunch of troops from the Army of Northern Virginia,
Mhm.
send them to Vicksburg. And Lee said, well, no, I think I'll invade Pennsylvania, get between the Union Army and Washington, and force them to sue for peace. Which, on paper, is not a bad idea. I mean, it wasn't a bad plan. So that's why he went up there. It was to kind of ease the problem at Vicksburg, because they thought if they did that, Grant would then have to move his forces to protect Washington,
Mhm.
which is what happened. But specifically Gettysburg, there was a rumor going around that there was a stock of shoes in Gettysburg. And what the Confederate Army was doing was they were basically raiding all the farms, they were stealing everything in sight.
Yeah.
Essentially. I mean, they were paying Confederate money for it, but it was barely worth the cost of toilet paper. So I forget which general it was, sent forces into town to take the shoes. And what they didn't know was that Union General John Buford and like 2,000 cavalry men had dismounted and were waiting for them there with repeating rifles.
Yeah.
So they thought it was just militia, and they were wrong.
Mm.
And Buford checked their progress, got enough time for General John Reynolds to get his army up to help shore up the defenses. And Reynolds, this is an interesting story. They had just made George Meade general of the army.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was like the 5th general in a year and a half. Because Lincoln just couldn't find one that would do the job.
Yeah.
And the best way I've heard it described is he couldn't find a general who understood the math until he got Grant. Shelby Foote, which if you ever seen Ken Burns,
yes,
PBS is like 9-part.
It's
PBS.
fantastic. One of the best documentaries ever made.
And one of the main contributors is a guy named Shelby Foote, who is a novelist / historian and a Southerner. And he pointed out that the South never really stood a chance. The way he put it was that the North basically fought that war with one hand behind their back, because they had the numbers, they had the people, they had the industry, like 1,000-fold more than the Confederacy did, and life was still pretty normal up north. Whereas down south, everything was wrecked.
Yeah.
Especially after Sherman got through.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
Yeah, buddy. But they made George Meade the general of the army, because they'd originally asked John Reynolds, and John Reynolds turned him down. Reynolds was considered the best Union general there was, but he flat out turned it down because of all the politics that were going on. Because of Stanton, the Secretary of War.
Oh yeah,
was just a douche of colossal proportions. Because it was always trying to just manipulate things. And but so Meade had just taken command. When he arrived at Gettysburg, he'd been in command exactly 4 days.
Yeah.
So the Confederates moved in, because they greatly outnumbered Buford and Reynolds. They pushed them back through the town. So technically, on paper anyway, it was a Confederate victory because they seized the town.
Right.
Well, unfortunately for them, where they pushed the Union back to was the high ground.
Yeah.
So the second day, when Lee decided to attack both flanks, they thought, okay, we'd be able to break these guys. He was wrong.
Yeah.
He was very wrong. And everywhere they attacked, the Union held. It was touch and go in a couple of spots, most famously on Little Round Top.
Yeah.
And this is one of those unlikely things that happen in wars. The guy in charge of the forces on the extreme left flank of the Union was a guy by the name of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
Yes.
He was a college professor who taught rhetoric at a college in Maine. He's about as far as you could get from a professional soldier as there was. But what he did, and what the 20th Maine did, literally saved the Union Army. Because he was running out of ammunition. He knew he couldn't retreat because if he did, the whole flank would collapse.
Yeah.
So instead, he did a bayonet charge, which was insane, but it worked.
Yeah.
So the second day of battle, 20,000 died.
Yeah.
On the second day of battle, 20,000.
Yeah.
Just think of that.
Devil's Den and all of that.
Devil's Den and the Peach Orchard and it was just brutal fighting. So the third day comes, and they had received one division of fresh troops, led by George Pickett. So Lee decided that, we hit both flanks, and they're strongest there because they've reinforced there. If we hit them in the center, we can break them. Well, two things were wrong with that. One, the guy in charge in the center was Hancock. Winfield Scott Hancock, and he was one hell of a general. It was there was a reason that even Longstreet said, "There's no way those guys are going to run." It's Hancock's in charge. And the second reason was that the Confederate Army, the 13,000 men that were engaged in Pickett's charge, had to cross over a mile of wide open field.
Yes.
Looking at that, it was insane. I mean, you look at that, what the hell was Lee thinking?
Yeah.
It was impossible.
Yeah.
And Longstreet kept telling him, no, let's go around to the right.
Yeah.
get between Meade and Washington, find a good piece of ground, and chop the hell out of them.
Yeah.
Like they did in Fredericksburg.
Yeah.
Well, Lee said no.
But you know why he didn't listen to Longstreet?
He thought the men were invincible.
Also, Longstreet was a Texan. He was not a Virginian.
He was from Georgia.
Georgia, but
Georgia
he was
and North
not a
Carolina,
Virginian.
one of those. No,
That,
he wasn't
that was, I
Virginian.
believe, the reason why. It was like, oh, all my Virginia generals say we should do it.
And they
Have
were
you
wrong.
been there lately? Have you ever been to Gettysburg?
No, I haven't. I've been buying.
There is, and I'll explain how I know this. Right where they did, there's this huge, like 30-foot tall statue of Robert E. Lee looking out over the, you know, you can see it from the Union side. You can, like, if you got a zoom lens, you can see it.
I've seen the pictures.
Like a quarter of a mile down the road, set into the woods, that if you don't know what's there, you'll miss it, is this small statue to Longstreet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And Longstreet was right.
Yeah.
He was absolutely right. He said no 13,000 men ever made could make that charge, could take that position. And Lee said, no, we're doing it anyway. And Longstreet was right.
Yeah.
They lost, I think, 50. They suffered 50%. 50% casualties.
Yeah.
50% casualties today would have been an absolute disaster.
Oh, yeah. I
Back
mean, what
then,
do they do? They pull, like, if you get 15 to 20%, they pull you out of the front line?
Oh, if 15% is a bloodbath.
Yeah.
They had 50% in one day.
Yeah.
And it was just, God, it was a massacre. It was an absolute massacre.
Yep.
But it was the most significant battle ever fought on American soil.
Yes.
Astounding stuff, man.
I was so fortunate. My last 2 years as a CIA officer, they asked me to join this leadership program in which like 7 or 8 of us were trained on the Battle of Gettysburg. Each of us got a different part of it to talk about. Mm-hmm. And we would bring new managers, and we would explain to them the good decisions that helped win the battle, the bad decisions that helped lose the battle. But one thing that Chamberlain is such an amazing character. Yeah. Like you said, he was, and this is all in the movie. You know, the only reason he became an officer was he was the only one in the unit that could read.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I heard from the guy who was doing the leadership that the traditional story is Chamberlain led the charge off Little Bighorn. Apparently, according to one of his diaries later, they were there and you could hear the wounded Union soldiers over the top of the ridge. And the flag bearer comes back and says to Chamberlain, we've got guys down there. They're just like 10, 15 feet away. Let's go get them. And Chamberlain said, no, we can't. If the Confederates attack us and we're not in line, it's over. So the flag bearer went back and he's standing there and he heard one of the guys yelling. So he crosses over the ridge and starts making his way down to see if one of the guys was close by. Well, naturally, the flag bearer is going down the hill. So every guy beside him thinks, oh, that's what he was talking to Chamberlain about. So one by one, they all go charging down the hill, screaming and yelling with their bayonets. And Chamberlain was like, shit, might as well join them. It was like one of those things, one of those moments in history that you really don't believe it.
Yeah, well, another magic moment was at the start of the battle, he sent one of his companies off to one side to cover their flank.
Yeah.
Well, they disappeared, and he thought they got wiped out. When that charge happened, all of a sudden, there they are.
Yeah.
And they were firing directly into the Confederates.
Yeah.
It was just, it was like,
It was the other thing I love about Chamberlain is the story about him at Appomattox. Do you know that story? Yeah, when
he saluted.
the federal, the peace agreement was signed, and the Confederate, he was the Union soldier who was going to accept the swords from the Confederates. And the Confederates walked up to him and they presented the swords, and he says, "I will not take these. We were brothers. We had a fight. The fight is over. We're brothers again."
Yeah, and when the first troops started going by him, he called his men to attention and saluted them.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a class act, man.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's one of those great figures in history that nobody knows anything about.
Yeah, and it's completely unlikely.
Yeah. The college professor, and he had to take, and he joined up illegally. He told the college, I'm going to go on sabbatical, and then he went and there's a story that in it was in the middle 80s when the Cold War was starting to wind down. I think Gorbachev was in power, and there was a Soviet delegation in Washington, and they requested permission to go and tour the Battle of Gettysburg by bus. So they said, no problem. The arrangements were made. The park was closed down all day. Everybody was cleared out. And the bus did its tour. And when the bus got to the other side, the head of the Soviet delegation said to the curator, he says, "That was absolutely awesome. I mean, for you to have a Confederate reenactment group there so we could see what it was like, to be a soldier in the Civil War." There were no reenactment groups that day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This
is the same.
I've heard there was a story. I think it was in Band of Brothers, or one of the ancillary books around Band of Brothers, where they went to Gettysburg to do some kind of training. I forget exactly the details, but they were talking about how haunted the place was.
Oh, yeah. Devil's Den is apparently, if you go there like at dawn, if you don't see the presence of a ghost, you're just completely oblivious to it. Never did that in the morning, but I want to.
Devil's Den itself was a complete screw up.
Yeah.
On the Union, Dan Sickles, the general who was originally up on the Little Round Top, was an idiot and decided, no, I like a position like half a mile forward of the Union line, which was idiotic in the extreme.
I know. Now, let me ask you a question. Are you I don't want to say believer. Do you sort of accept the theory that if Jeb Stuart had been doing his job and following Lee's flank, he would have known about Buford, he would have known about the Union forces, and Lee might have been able to do something, maybe get in there before the Union did, and won the Battle of Gettysburg?
I don't think there would have been a Battle of Gettysburg if the cavalry hadn't just completely screwed up and left them blind. He probably wouldn't have gone there. Lee was no idiot.
No, he was brilliant.
Oh yeah, he was absolutely brilliant. He was also lucky.
Well, he told me a story, the guy that ran the program, that 50 years after the Battle of Gettysburg, they had a big reunion. And all the Confederate and all the Union soldiers still there. They got together and they were talking, they were getting together, and I was like, hey, let's reenact Pickett's charge. So the Union got on their side, the Confederates got on their side, and the Confederates did the Confederate battle yell, and they all ran. And by the time they got to the fence in the middle, they beat the hell out of each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Union and Confederate were like refighting the war. But then that night, they all went back to their campground and drank beer and were buddies.
I heard a different one, and I don't know if this was the same reunion, but it was one of the reunions. They started across the field and got to a certain point, and I forget the exact tipping point, but at a certain point, the guys from the Union just left their wall and came out there and just they hugged each other.
Oh,
because it was just
yeah.
So many people died that day in like an hour.
I know. And then you've got the people who are historians and that, and love this stuff. And the guy told me also one time he was given a private tour, not for the government, of Gettysburg, and a woman asked him, why did all the Civil War battles take place at national parks?
Oh, jeez.
And his response was brilliant. He looked at her without missing a beat and said, well, because they had all the battle maps here. So.
Perfect.
I know.
Jeez.
So, but no, it's a beautiful, it is a very, the whole town is exactly like it was back in 1863. They, I did once a horse tour.
Mm-hmm.
You start off, you go by, we went by the Confederate lines in front of Little Round Top. We turned where the big red barn is, where Pickett's on his horse. We went over to the Confederate side, and then we stopped and had a break, and then we followed Pickett's charge on horse. And it's mind-blowing that Lee would order it, but that these young men didn't mind doing it.
Yeah, would do it.
They were so enamored of Robert E. Lee.
And even when they retreated finally at the end of that charge, they kept turning around to face the enemy.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to get shot in the back.
Yeah.
It's just astounding what these guys did.
I know.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And bloody.
Yeah, see, I was born and raised in the Northeast. So for all my life, it was the American Revolution. It was only when I moved down to Virginia to work for the agency that I started like, oh, there's a Civil War battlefield here and here and here.
Yep. Now, before we wrap this up, we can't really talk about Gettysburg without talking about Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
Yes.
At the one specific line, I'll read it for you. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Well, he got it half right.
Yeah.
The world still remembers it, but everybody knows.
And they didn't even want Lincoln there. He was an afterthought. Yeah. The main speaker was Edward Everett Horton, I think.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he spoke for 3 hours.
I think it was 2.
Yeah, and then Lincoln came up and Lincoln gave that powerful short address. There's even that famous photograph of him leaving the stage because the speech was so short, the photographer didn't have enough time to set up the camera to take the picture of him.
Yeah, yeah. The even Lincoln thought the speech sucked. And the original, most of the original reviews of the speech were like, "This guy's a douche." But the featured speaker that day wrote to him and said, "I wish that in 2 hours I could have come as close to the central point of our reason for being here as you did in 2 minutes."
Yeah.
That's just Lincoln was. Yeah. One great quote from Shelby Foote from that Ken Burns. documentary. He was talking about Nathan Bedford Forrest,
Mm-hmm.
and he said he was talking to Nathan Bedford Forrest's granddaughter, and who allowed him to wave the general's sword above his head. And he said, "I think the Civil War produced two genuine geniuses. One of them was your grandfather, the other was Abraham Lincoln."
Mm-hmm.
And the granddaughter says, "We don't think too much of that other fella."
And the more you read about him, there was this thing once I read. It was on one of these inspirational pages.
Mhm.
He suffered from severe depression. He
Mhm.
failed. He never went to college. He failed at every job he tried. When he tried to run for public office at the beginning, he failed. And they listed all of his failures, and then said the man we're talking about is Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves, wrote the Gettysburg Address, and kept the country united.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many quotes
Yeah.
from his speeches.
Oh, yeah.
The better angels of our the better angels of our whatever the hell it was.
Mm.
Of our natures, better angels of our natures, and
And he was a vampire hunter.
and he was a vampire hunter. So, which is why we're hosting this in a horror group.
Yes, there's a link to horror.
All right. Do we have any audience members out there who'd like to add anything? By all means, do. We had a couple of people: Albert Moss, Jack Childress,
Jack,
Angel Ramon,
yeah, good group.
Mark Zuckerberg,
the Wizard of Zuck. Ignore the man in the metaverse.
Exactly. But I mean, the main reason that Scott and I are doing this is, obviously, we both love history.
Yeah.
But Scott has written several historical based novels. My next two big series
Mm-hmm.
will be historical based. One of them is supernatural thrillers set in World War II, and the other is historical zombie fiction, specifically in the Civil War.
Oh, you're gonna do what I was thinking of doing. Zombie take its charge.
No, I'm doing Shiloh.
Oh, okay.
The Wilderness.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine that, how scary that would have been.
Yeah.
And the Zombie March to the Sea.
Mm-hmm. See, I love this show. When Jeff came to me and said, "Are you interested?" I jumped at the chance because I love movies, but I'm a purist. If you're gonna show me the movie, I want to see reality. 30 seconds over Tokyo. Though the story itself is fictional. Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's based sort of.
But I mean, the combat scenes were accurate. Bridge Too Far, The Longest Day. But then you get these schlock fests. My friend and I, Curtis, were watching Pearl Harbor.
Oh, God.
And I swear to God, he almost pulled out his Magnum and blew away the TV.
I know.
Oh, yeah, let's have fighter pilots fly B-25s off of the deck of the Hornet, led by Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, just look at The Patriot. Mel Gibson.
I know.
I mean, it's not a bad movie, but it's horrible history.
Yeah.
There's nothing historically accurate about it.
And to me, history is fascinating.
Oh, fascinating.
It's as fascinating as any fiction because you get those stupid little things like the charge Chamberlain made at Little Bighorn. Stupid little things that if it had changed just one bit, all of history could have been changed. It fascinates me.
Look at the number of those instances in World War II.
Yeah.
Just the fact that Hitler took a sleeping pill.
Yeah.
the night before D-Day, and just wouldn't be woken.
Now,
Wouldn't
like
be awakened.
one of my favorite war movies is Patton with George C. Scott.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some research, and it's predominantly accurate. There's a few dramatized, things are pushed together. But the one scene in the movie, my favorite scene, is faked. And that's the scene when on Sicily, when Montgomery is coming into, oh God, I can't think of the name of the city at the Messina.
Palermo? Messina? Is it
I think it
Messina
was
or
Messina.
Palermo?
I think it
One
was
of those two.
Messina. And the bagpipes are playing and the people are cheering and Montgomery's standing in the seat waving, and all of a sudden everybody stops.
Mm-hmm.
And Montgomery gets out and walks into the square, and there's Patton and his Third Army waiting for him.
Mm-hmm.
It was two Jeeps. It was a British and an American Jeep racing. And the Americans beat the British into the town square by 30 seconds.
Yeah, something like that. It was, yeah.
Yeah. But,
Yeah.
you know.
Now that's a show I want to do.
Patton?
About, well, Patton, yes.
Yeah.
But more specifically about Monty. Because, I mean, there's a weird thing that has happened in my research into the Second World War, which has been going on for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the books I've read were written by Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the documentaries I've seen were produced by the British. And from what I've gleaned, Monty was an idiot.
Yeah.
He wasn't that great of a general.
No, he wasn't. I mean, they had all the ultra information. Patton and Montgomery got the same thing. And Montgomery would look and say, there's 15,000 German troops in front of me. I got to build up 45,000 3-to-1 odds. Patton would look at it and go, okay, there's 500,000 here, 5,000 here. I'm going to go right up the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what was funny was because, I always thought Americans don't like Montgomery. We're Patton fans. I spent 10 weeks after the war in Iraq ended. I was the liaison officer in Basra to the British Desert Rats, Montgomery's people. And one night we were sitting around the table having drinks, and I said, jokingly, I says, well, I'm not going to get into the discussion about who's better, Patton or Montgomery. And they all looked at me and said, Montgomery sucked.
Oh, yeah.
And that was his own Desert Rats. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it actually, the Battle of El Alamein, which made him famous, he nearly lost it.
Oh, yeah.
And he had just overwhelming superiority.
And he wouldn't have won it if it hadn't been for the OSS. Yeah. Making that whole ploy about it was going to go through the Qatar Depression.
Yeah, which was, at the time, it was something executive, wasn't it?
It was SOE under the British. You're right.
Yeah.
It was SOE under the British. It was OSS under us. Strategic Operation Executive.
Yeah. I think they eventually changed that, but.
Yeah, run by Stevenson.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for a book, anybody out there who wants the most fascinating book about espionage and warfare, God, Not a Man Called Intrepid. I'm trying to think of the other one. Oh, I'll have to come up with the name of it. But it's about how the SOE won World War II. They found out what the Germans were up to, figured out ways.
They broke the Enigma code.
The Operation Mincemeat, which is a new movie on Netflix.
Yep.
We ought to do that sometime.
Mm-hmm.
But, I wish I could think of the name of it. Bodyguard of Lies.
I don't think I've heard of that.
Bodyguard of Lies. I can't remember who the author is. It's a long book, but it is absolutely brilliant. You read that book, and it reads like an espionage novel.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, and for our audience who would like to read about what we discussed today, there is 1776 by McCullough.
By McCullough. Sorry, I'm not being rude. I got a book over here I was reading. One second.
All right.
This book is a fantastic, I've never finished it, fantastic military and political history.
Almost a Miracle.
Almost a Miracle by John Furling. I learned more reading this book, the first 5 or 6 chapters I read in one night than I did in like a 6-week American history course.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that book. There's also the Washington documentary, the 3-part Washington documentary on Netflix. There is HBO's John Adams.
Yes.
Which is very good. For the Civil War in general and Gettysburg in specific, there's Michael Shiraz' Pulitzer Prize winning novel, The Killer Angels.
Right.
There is Ken Burns' 9-part PBS documentary. There's also, if you really want to learn about the Civil War, Shelby Foote, Foote, wrote a 3-volume history of the Civil War. It's fantastic.
Yeah. One of the best ever written.
Yes, absolutely. One of the best ever written. And there's all sorts of, there's a lot more documentaries about the Civil War than there is about the Revolution, which I've always found fascinating.
Well, I mean, the American Revolution was pretty much confined up to the Northeast and around Washington and Virginia. But like my mother-in-law is a Southerner, and you can't even mention the name Sherman around her.
Yeah, I bet.
I went with her and my wife once to see Gone with the Wind. Boy, were they giving me dirty looks through the movie.
I bet. One thing that we didn't bring up that I wanted to was how long things took during the Revolution. In the lead up to the Declaration of Independence, the original what the original Continental Congress did was send a letter asking the king to negotiate.
Yes.
Which nowadays, you send the thing out, you get an answer back in a couple days. It took like 3 months.
Yeah.
The Atlantic crossing was like 6 weeks one way.
Well, it was like the same in the War of 1812. The war had been over, the peace treaty had been signed, and then we had the Battle of New Orleans.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I just got a call. My daughter got out of work early. I got to go pick her up.
Nope, that's cool. It's about that time anyway.
It was great, Joe. I am looking forward to doing more of these.
Yep, we're going to do this again in 2 weeks, folks. 2 weeks.
But we're not sure yet what we're going to do.
Yeah, if you guys want to offer suggestions, by all means, throw them out there.
All right.
And in the meantime, adios.
And happy July 4th.
Happy July 4th.
And for our British, Australian, Canadian cousins, happy we finally got rid of those damn colonial states.
On that note, take it easy, folks.